Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining us on this two-part series around decarbonization efforts. Part one will be focused on unlocking project funding through decarbonization efforts and also recognition. I am Chris Racine with Environ Energy, the corporate sponsor for ASH. My role is a director of solution services, specifically for engineering. I have a background in mechanical engineering, and I've been in the energy efficiency space for about 9 years now, predominantly focusing on turnkey energy efficiency projects, all retrofit, all really for commercial and industrial, specifically critical infrastructure. Jennifer, I'm going to turn it over to you for a quick introduction.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here. Thanks to Ashley for having us. My name is Jennifer Carney. I am a 20-year plus veteran of the energy and sustainability industry. I am currently the president of the sustainability division at Environ Energy, focused on decarbonization, greenhouse gas inventories, and central plant electrification projects. Looking forward to having an engaging webinar today.
Like we had mentioned, part one today is going to be explaining what decarbonization is, kind of demystifying that term, and two, how you can then turn an action plan into savings and recognition, and hopefully future projects as you kind of move your facility forward. Jennifer?
So just running through the agenda, we're going to be talking about, what is decarbonization and why are we doing it? The key elements of any solid decarbonization plan, assembling an energy management team, establishing your emissions inventory and developing a baseline, performing a facility assessment, and using all of the data collected to ultimately assemble a risk assessment and mitigation strategy. All of these activities resulting in a final decarbonization report, and then taking steps to gain recognition and pursuing those short-term action items to achieve what the plan has set forth.
As we go through this, just remember there is a Q&A button at the bottom, so please feel free to put any questions in the chat. We are happy to stop real time. We will also save about 10-15 minutes at the end just to answer any questions that come up, but please feel free to interrupt us in the process. Jennifer, I'll hand it over back to you.
Yeah, so I'm going to provide a little bit of background on who Environ is and what's comprised in our company. So we go to our origin story in 1995 when my colleague Mark Minenberg founded a company called Hospital Energy, which was an energy management consulting firm really focusing on energy procurement and almost exclusively dedicated to supporting healthcare. In 2021, Mark teamed up with 424 Capital as an investor, looking to grow and expand Hospital Energy and create a new company. In 2021, there was the first acquisition, which was a merger between Hospital Energy and my legacy company, which was called Gotham 360. Gotham 360 was a New York City-based energy management consultancy that focused on 4 pillars of energy management, which were procurement, efficiency, resiliency, and sustainability. So Gotham plus Hospital Energy created Environ. In 2022 and 2023, we went on to acquire 5 more companies, Scope 5, which is a greenhouse gas tracking tool. So it's our own proprietary software. The ISOS group is out of Southern California, focusing on ESG compliance and data validation. API and Best Practice Energy, which are both focused on the procurement side. Prism Energy Services, which is our in-house engineering group, of which Chris is a member of that team. And so the 7 companies today make up Environ Energy, driving sustainability and energy management solutions to a diverse group, but still healthcare is sort of our vertical market. So we will start off with really sort of defining what is a decarbonization plan. So a decarbonization plan, and there are a lot of sort of buzzwords out there for plans right now: climate action plan, energy conservation plans. A decarbonization plan is really an overarching structure outlining strategies and actions that an organization, so in this case, a healthcare organization, will take to reduce greenhouse gas emissions across its operations. So a decarbonization plan in its sort of best form is going to focus primarily on improving energy efficiency and achieving energy conservation, reducing waste. But we're also talking about converting higher carbon sources of energy consumption with lower carbon intensity sources. So the overall goal of a decarbonization plan is to transition towards a low carbon or even a net zero carbon future, which aligns with global and national climate targets. So what we ordinarily do in terms of identifying the key objectives is looking at where the most carbon intensive areas are, setting measurable targets for reducing emissions in those intensive targets, and then planning for the adoption of clean energy solutions, which would include operational efficiency, energy conservation, and sustainable practices.
Thank you, Jennifer. With that, as we go to the next slide, we'd like to queue up the first poll question 1. If you don't mind putting that up for the audience. We're going to give everyone about 30 seconds or so to enter in their choice.
So poll 1, what is your current level of understanding of decarbonization strategies and their potential to attract funding? From no understanding to very knowledgeable. So we've got 53% as somewhat knowledgeable, 30% limited understanding, 10% no understanding, and 7% very knowledgeable. So I'd say we probably have a very sort of engaged audience today, falling between limited understanding and somewhat knowledgeable on decarbonization, which is great.
Looks like a bell curve.
Yes.
Yeah, that's good to understand. So thank you everyone for providing that feedback. As we get into an example of a decarbonization plan, this is really everything that a decarbonization plan can encompass. You're starting all the way on the left with the beginning, which is viewing what your risk is. What is your compliance risk? What is your strategic landscape look like? Are there potential operational hurdles that are going to inhibit you from moving forward towards decarbonization, as well as doing an inventory and setting a baseline, really putting your stake in the ground as to where are we and what do we want to say is ground zero? And then from there, what do we think is a feasible goal? Sometimes that goal may be set for you if you're in a territory that has a building performance standard like Local Law 97, like BERDO, like BUDO. Oregon and Washington are both coming out with a statewide initiative. Those goals are kind of set for you. They have a target, either an EUI that you need to meet by 2030 or a carbon threshold you need to be at by 2030 or 2035. And so that goal is effectively already put in the ground. And this is more about stating where are we and how quickly can we get to that goal. And most importantly, as we get into energy conservation development, carbon reduction measures, as well as electrification evaluation and renewables, it's really what is it going to cost to get to that goal? What are the hurdles operationally, as well as just physically, logistically, to get equipment in and out of the building, to increase potentially services into the building, electrical services, how to get to carbon neutral, is really what the decarbonization plan should focus on holistically. And then theoretically, once all of your systems are fully electrified, you could look into carbon offsets, offsite solar in terms of like putting the solar field on your ISO. That is a potential option. There's a few different flavors depending on what the regulatory body allows. So why is it important? I just kind of touched on it, but to really hit the nail on the head, we are seeing compliance drive towards goals significantly, especially in the healthcare market. It doesn't matter what kind of commercial and industrial facility you are. If you're in a building performance standard, you need to comply. A lot of these building performance standards have what we call alternate pathways, where they may allow you some flexibility because you're a nonprofit, because you're a community organization, because you're getting government funding. But from what we have seen, you are not exempt by any means. So the first goal of a decarbonization plan is to align with those regulatory requirements. The second is, if you have a corporate sustainability goal, to create a method to getting to that goal, to really put practical understanding of what your facility is and map out how you're going to get to that goal. The third, and the bullets 3 and 4 here kind of tie together. Healthcare as an institution is typically, the goal is to be a steward of your community. You want to push forward the idea and the brand that you are environmentally conscious, you are careful about the health and safety of your customers, and you do not want to be what is defined as a polluter to your community. So this can help brand that message, can help show that there's a plan forward, and can be used to kind of gain recognition and momentum to really execute on meeting that plan. The next part of why it's important to focus on a decarbonization plan would be to, like our poll question, target based on the projects that you have available, what has the most financial incentive? What can you get incentives for? What is going to avoid the carbon penalty the most for you? And while also thinking what is the least invasive to your facility. There's many variables that kind of have to be factored into now with the kind of carrot of incentives and the stick of the building performance standards really coming into play. Lastly, we do want to be climate conscious and push forward that we are trying to achieve a reduction in our carbon footprint year over year. And if you can create a plan and then in that plan have an energy management plan of each year how you're going to state your reduction goals and a methodology for that, this helps to push that forward. Jennifer, I'm going to turn it back to you.
So establishing an energy management team is really an essential first step. And what we would ordinarily look to do is really create a diverse collection of individuals representing different roles on the team. So it is always great to have someone either from a board of trustees or the executive suite to really set the tone for the entire engagement. We like to include clinical staff, infection control, engineering, design, and construction. This is a group we designate as being responsible because this is where a lot of the activity will take place with respect to rolling out and implementing a decarbonization plan. Similarly, facilities and operations working very, very closely with engineering and design construction to be responsible for the operation of existing buildings while also looking to the future in terms of designing and constructing more sustainable buildings. Procurement and purchasing. A lot of the scope 3 emissions will be captured in the procurement purchasing group, finance and tax, legal and contracts. If there is a sustainability or ESG office within a healthcare organization, some do, some don't have that. It's almost a luxury to have that in-house. Human resources also marketing and communications to be informed of all of the initiatives underway, because we find that the more we communicate what's underway, the more stakeholder engagement that we get. And then IT security infrastructure also plays a role. And so we've kind of created this heat map showing where we have responsibility, accountability, consultation, and just an area of being informed.
I would just also like to highlight this kind of goes to a governance structure. And it is fundamentally so important to have approval at the highest level, or at least I'll call it buy-in to the mission at the highest level, because then once you're able to generate a report or generate a list of priorities, even if it's not in a formal report format, you have the ability to say, hey, we agreed we wanted to move forward with an energy reduction goal. We agreed that we needed to avoid any type of fines we're looking at currently. And here's the plan to do that. I now need the funding to do that. So setting up that governance structure from the beginning and getting that buy-in at the top is incredibly important to making your life easier down the road. Jennifer?
Yep.
Yeah.
The most essential elements to be successful with a decarbonization plan, it really starts with data and collection and data integrity. We really can't stress this enough. Oftentimes we're brought in after a certain amount of data has been collected. An organization may think that they have a comprehensive greenhouse gas inventory, and we often find a lot of holes and gaps. So from the start, establishing what's the appropriate level of detail. Are we going at the utility account level? Does the organization have a network of submeters where we want to track carbon at that sort of more granular level? Does the utility account have submeters under it? We are going to be looking to account for all of the energy streams. So everything that's consumed on site, from the electricity that comes from the grid, natural gas, district steam, and all of the distillate types. So we list fuel oil here. It could also be propane. It could be any sort of distillate energy source. Documenting all of the energy usage through assembling energy bills, looking at meter readings and other use data, which might be streamed from a building automation system possibly, or other sorts of internal tracking, collecting facility and operational data. So that's the non-energy related data, looking at building sizes, building use types, operating hours, occupancy levels, and things of that nature. Then we move after the data collection phase, and when data has been validated, we move into a phase of benchmarking. So establishing what is that baseline year going to be, and establishing the baseline year is really setting a line in the sand against which your future performance will be compared. So we would, in the bar graph on the bottom right, this is a historical profile for a client where we selected 2015 as a baseline year. So coming off of 2015, which was a big energy consumption year, and using that as a baseline, we get to take advantage of all of the reductions that have taken place since then. Identifying the metrics. So using Energy Star Portfolio Manager to create a benchmarking score based on the kBTUs per square foot, looking at the BTUs per product. We've also done BTUs per patient day to come up with not only absolute gross emissions, but emissions over square feet. And by looking at both of those things, we can see if, as the square footage grows, the carbon intensity comes down. That would ordinarily be the goal, working closely with design and construction. And then publishing results. So there can be several sort of periods of communication as different goals are attained. There's usually some sort of annual reporting of a progress to goal. And it takes the form of an announcement of performance against the baseline. And that can be an internal communication to facilities managers, other key stakeholders. And it's really optional whether that is also a public facing announcement of achieving a result.
We do have a question in the chat from the slide before, Jennifer. So I'm just going to go back to that. The question is, can you clarify the difference between accountable and responsible for a team member? I think the simplest way to put it is the person accountable means that they are an owner of the group, but they aren't actually doing the work. So the engineering team, the facilities team, the sustainability team would be executing the facility walkthroughs. They would be assisting with the data collection for an energy benchmark. They would be assisting or owning the Energy Star portfolio manager once it's created. The accountable person would be the one that says the team is being successful or not. Are we meeting our goals that we set forth for ourselves? Did we meet our energy reduction goal this year? And also, who is the one who would be setting those goals typically?
Agree there.
Awesome. Jennifer, anything else on emissions inventory and baseline?
No.
Okay. Facility assessments.
Do you want me to speak to this one, Chris, or are you?
Yes, please.
Okay. So moving on in the key elements of a successful decarbonization plan beyond the collection of data and establishing the baseline and then reporting out over time is the importance of addressing the facility. And this is where we come into the facility assessment. One of the first things that is really key to getting up and going on a facility assessment is doing an interview with the operational team. So we want to really speak to the central plant operations, the facility operators. We want to know if there are any known issues, deferred maintenance, if there have already been set some operational goals. What's the current capital plan? What's the length of the current capital plan? What's the history on past capital and efficiency projects? Some organizations set aside capital money every single year to implement energy efficiency. Others are really focused on replacing, repairing aging infrastructure. Prior to the assessment, there's always a review of existing drawings. Different organizations always have a different level of having drawings in a library, looking at trend data, spending time with building automation system, reviewing asset inventories, and then also looking at what is in the upcoming year's capital projects. What can we do to an existing project to help decarbonize it? What can we do with any capital projects that are planned for some of the outer years that will assist us in reaching our goals? We would then move into a phase performing an ASHRAE level 2 energy audit. And an energy audit and a decarbonization plan are different, but the energy audit is a big component of what goes into a decarbonization plan. And this is where we're going to be basically performing a very comprehensive, detailed asset inventory, establishing the sequence of operations for the existing control systems. We're also, with respect to control systems, we're also going to be looking for gaps. How can we best utilize the control systems that we already have? How can we add to it to get additional benefit? We're going to basically work very closely with the operational team to prioritize facility maintenance needs, energy efficiency goals, and process changes. And then traditionally, at the end of an ASHRAE level 2 energy audit, you'll see a list of energy conservation items. So within the context of this energy audit, we will be performing a complete list of carbon reduction measures. So it's going to look very much like ECMs or energy conservation, with the estimated cost to construct, what are the rebates and tax incentives available, performing a saving analysis that incorporates carbon reduction as well as operational cost savings, looking at an ROI, and an ROI through the lens of avoided fines, adhering to regulation, and reducing operating costs. And then putting together some phasing considerations for certain project types, which may be in the capital plan, they may be out in year 5, but if we can pull that forward and maybe complete it in year 3, take advantage of some short-term energy rebates, tax incentives, or comply with regulation and avoid fines. So that's where the phasing considerations come into play.
I would also add with decarbonization planning, there's a whole added layer of when you're talking about fuel switching from natural gas to electricity or fuel oil to electricity. There's extra layers to be considered. Do you have enough load coming into the facility from the grid to support that project? Do you have the breakers available or the panel schedule available to support that project? Do you have the redundancy? Because if you're switching typically from natural gas, fuel oil was your backup. So now you need to add generator capacity to potentially decarbonize. So healthcare has an interesting problem where there's a cascading effect of if you really do want to fuel switch and move to an electric-based system, there are extra hurdles to overcome. I think we can all can say where you put the generator and the physical requirements of that system can sometimes be no easy task when it comes to a healthcare kind of logistics organization.
Absolutely agree. Space is always at a huge premium.
So when we get into risk mitigation, the first is the regulatory risk. As we are seeing, building performance standards are popping up left and right. They are happening at the local level at times, also at the state level now. We are seeing both the coasts already either have or have pushed forward legislation to move forward with a building performance standard of some kind or flavor. We've also seen Colorado, Illinois, and some other Indiana, I believe, and potentially Ohio talk about it as well. So it is a changing landscape, and depending on your location, that is a risk that definitely needs to be evaluated of how likely is it to happen, how quickly could it potentially be implemented, and really, how would you, if that program was implemented, how would you handle that? The second is kind of the financial analysis of that regulatory landscape. So if that program went forward and you are in your current state you are now, what is the physical or the financial risk identified? Additionally, if you were to move forward, when we talk about kind of scenario planning, it goes back to that redundancy conversation. If you want to decarbonize, that's great, but there are those added layers of N+1 redundancy requirements, generator backup on all emergency power, and the logistics of getting everything in. So many times we see in healthcare, the building was built around the boiler room or the chiller room. And to access it, you have to go through 2 walls. And that is no easy feat with a hospital that cannot shut down. So all that scenario planning and kind of future proofing is required as you kind of think through your master plan. And lastly, the strategic plan needs to be bought in at the highest level. And I think when you're able to really state, this is why we came up with these list of priorities, and here are all the notes associated to why this project is over that project, or operationally why this needs to be done before this. That's really important because it clearly shows that it's a well thought out process. There's a reason behind each decision, and it's not just we're putting 6 projects forward and we hope one of the 6 gets funded in this capital budget, but it's we need this one first because that is going to give us the most benefit, and here's why. I'd like to queue up poll question number 2. What is your primary challenges in securing funding for decarbonization projects? Lack of clear business case, limited access to investors or lenders, regulatory hurdles, insufficient understanding of funding mechanisms, or an other box. And we'll give everyone about 30 seconds to respond. So we have a pretty large split. Um, Nothing over 50%, that's for sure. We had about 23% say a lack of clear business case, 45% limited access to investors or lenders. I think that really comes down to funding. 18% regulatory hurdles, just getting approval, probably operational issues as well. Insufficient understanding of funding mechanisms, that can be a challenge, and hopefully something a programmatic kind of decarbonization plan could help you overcome. And then if anyone has any insight, please feel free to put it in the chat. But I think this isn't surprising. I think everyone has different flavors. I also think it depends on what territory you're in, and what kind of healthcare institution you are, private, public. It probably helps define the hurdles. Jennifer, anything to add on the poll?
This does not surprise me at all. I think that, especially in healthcare, folks have been sort of in front of energy conservation and energy efficiency for a long time, and the primary limitation is funding.
So, moving on to what a ideal, I'll call it decarbonization report includes. The first being an energy management plan. What do we mean by energy management? There is a way to consistently aggregate all of your usage year over year and a plan or a methodology to track what your energy usage is and hopefully your energy reduction is year over year. This would also typically be used to go into Energy Star Portfolio Manager and would be used in any benchmarking exercise that has started to be required throughout the country, as well as for a building performance standard. The second is the inventory and baseline. That really allows you to set a goal or put a stake in the ground of this is where we were and this is where we're going. So that is typically a one-time exercise. Sometimes organizations would have already completed that exercise, which is totally fine. I think a lot of times a decarbonization report can be part and pieced, where you may have internally done or can internally execute a part of it, but you're going to need some type of outside resource to assist with the rest. Establishing goals, typically it's either done for you through some type of building performance standard, or you would set it yourself through what we call a science-based target. So typically there's an industry standard of, hey, we believe that as an organization, this type of industry can get to 30% by 2035. And to back into that number is simply a 2.5 or 3% regression year over year, or excuse me, reduction, not regression, a 2.5 or 3% reduction year over year that will automatically lead you to that 30% goal. It's really trying to break it into chunks that are feasible. I think a lot of us have, especially as sustainability has become more and more prevalent, when you hear a number like 50% by 2040 or net zero by 2050, it's kind of hard to conceptualize. And the hope is that a decarbonization plan can start to conceptualize how you get there and what you need to do incrementally to get there. Um, Carbon reduction measures are typically the main focus of a decarbonization report. What can you do, and what is the prioritization of those measures? And potentially what needs, as Jennifer was talking about before, needs to be staged. Some things need to be done in a certain order so that they can be executed. Typically, that prioritization list is based on potential fine avoidance, risk assessment, both operationally and redundancy wise, capital budget planning. So many times we hear, everyone would like to do a $10 million chiller project and redo their entire chiller plant and have a brand new modular chiller setup. But that isn't feasible most of the time. It has to be staged. It has to be done slowly. There's only a certain amount of money per year. So you have to find a way to, one, stretch that money as much as possible through incentives, and two, find a way to piece out that project year over year so that hopefully in 5 years you have a brand new chiller plant. Internal rate of return, that's typically some guidance provided by the CFO. That is why we say it is so important to include finance in the conversation from the start. One, you're not just going to show up at their door one day and say, hey, I'm asking for X amount of money for these measures that the board has bought into, but they've been involved in the conversation. They know that those projects are being developed. They're aware of the magnitude of cost for what is being promised or what needs to be done to reduce that fine. And hopefully they could even provide an internal rate of return or an ROI like a threshold that they would like to stay below so that you know where your boundaries are. Typically, those CRMs would also include energy savings calculations. So how much carbon are we reducing? A lot of times these projects, especially when we're talking about carbon reduction, it can be a savings of therms, but a significant increase in electricity. And that has a net reduction of carbon, but you are going to potentially have similar operational costs, or in some cases, if you're electrifying a heating system, you may have a slight increase in electricity costs to remove the therms from your portfolio. So that's something to always consider. There's even a more significant effect there with your energy contracts. So as you start to plan out decarbonization projects and you are potentially drastically changing your demand curve or your supply, like the index amount that you're going to be purchasing each year, you want to have those conversations for your energy contracts ahead of time so that they are prepared for drastic changes in your usage profile. Because at the end of the day, the last thing you want is to be buying more gas than you need for like a 2 year period because you're locked into a certain contract. The last is the renewable strategy. So, like we had talked about before, that could be offsite, that could be on-site. I think we've seen already renewables come a long way in a very short amount of time. There is the potential that that technology keeps evolving. But in general, those are definitely going to be added benefits to helping get towards your goal. At the end of the day, they can typically only offset electricity. So there's a fundamental problem of needing to remove natural gas usage from your facility to truly decarbonize. You're never going to get to truly zero electricity usage. We all know that's not feasible. You're a hospital, you have critical ORs, they are energy hogs. They are what they are. They are critical healthcare, they have critical healthcare uses. So that energy is not going away, but it can be offset if the rest of your facility is not on natural gas or any type of scope 1 emissions. Typically, the decarbonization report would include a measurement and verification strategy. So how are you proving that the energy savings is actually occurring? Is that through sub-metering? Is that through third-party utility validation? There's a few different options, but you would definitely want to include a strategy of how that is going to be done. And lastly, retro-commissioning recommendations. Retro-commissioning is consistent. It's just like preventative maintenance. It should be done, once a year, once every other year, to just go in and say, we need to tune up the system. Just like you would tune up your car, and after you drive your car for 2 years straight without going to the mechanic, it feels a little clunky. Your HVAC systems are going to be the same way. Like it's so important to do that preventative maintenance and to constantly commission, especially those more complicated control systems, and especially if you have any pneumatics. A lot of times, as we know, those can kind of just default to failed on. And that's something we just want to keep on top of as much as we can. So I'm going to pause there and go to our third poll question with the conversation of carbon reduction measures in mind. Which of the following decarbonization strategies are you currently considering or implementing in your projects? Renewable energy integration, energy efficiency improvements, carbon capture and storage, scope 1 and 2 emission tracking, facility assessments. Really, have you taken any steps down the path towards decarbonization? And you just need to kind of quantify it into a single document. If so, kind of what have you been doing? So we'll give everyone about a minute to answer that. So, um, we have, it looks like quite a few different answers. Some people, I'm imagining, put multiple options. So we have 43% said that they are moving forward with renewable energy integration. I'm assuming a lot of that is going to be solar currently. That's great to hear. I think that's where we are going to continue to need to trend. Energy efficiency improvements, that is not surprising at all. I think we all have acknowledged at this point and seen the incentives available for especially simple projects like lighting improvements, VFDs to be installed, even when you're purchasing a new chiller to purchase that higher efficiency chiller so that you get the best bang for your buck. Carbon capture and storage is definitely some of the newer technology. So I'm impressive to see that someone said that they are moving forward with that. Scope 1 and 2 emissions tracking, like we said, that's something that a lot of organizations can do internally if they have that kind of buy-in to move forward with tracking and energy management. So that's great to see. And then facility assessments, it looks like, a lot of people here are identifying, I need to move the ball forward. I need to have people on site to help me move that forward. So good to see that everyone's kind of taking a focus to it. Jennifer, anything to add?
Um, I'm I'm really impressed to see the response on scope 1 and 2 emissions tracking at 48%. That's tremendous. I think facility assessments and energy efficiency improvements, I would expect to see that as an ongoing activity within a healthcare organization, but it's great that many of you are pursuing the emissions tracking. And then the 43% on renewable energy integration is also, it's incredibly encouraging. Renewable energy is not easy.
Thanks, Jennifer. I know we only have 15 minutes left, so I will make sure we save 5 minutes at the end. But tying this all back to how to gain recognition and gain funding. So how do you utilize a decarbonization report to move the ball forward to gaining that funding, gaining that board level approval, and ultimately having projects actually executed? So with that decarbonization plan, there are so many different programs, platforms, certifications, and frankly, just overall marketing that can be done to get that buy-in and continue to move your goal or move towards your goal. So at the global level, there is the Climate Disclosure Project, CDP, and the Science Based Target Initiative, SBTIs, that you can report to and get a certification from. There's also, obviously, everyone here knows LEED or BREEAM, as well as third-party verification for your GHG inventories. That's basically saying, I did my inventory. I know a lot of you have said you've done scope 1 and 2, and it's been checked off by a third party, so it's been validated. Third, and I think this is a huge one, is participation in sustainability awards and industry pledges. Because at the end of the day, not only are you getting the pat on the back, but your leadership team is getting the pat on the back that you did the HHS pledge, or you received the Joint Commission Sustainable Health Certificate, or the ASHI Heal Quest pledge was completed. There also are some statewide initiatives that have funding tied to them. The most recent one that came out was the NICEF grant, which NICEF is the insurance provider for a lot of hospitals in New York. They tied $1 million premium rebate for completing a climate action plan, a decarbonization report, and a scope 1, 2, and 3 inventory. So there's also that funding available that if you're aware of that, you could potentially be bringing significant dollars to the table for your organization and hopefully pushing your program forward. Obviously, there also are the sustainability awards that are, closely tied to Energy Star, Green Buildings Award, as well as the Partner of the Year for the portfolio manager. Lastly, we say, there was a reason marketing was on that energy team. When you're completing a project, it is always good to tie it back to the marketing side because you want that LinkedIn post, you want that newsletter to say the great project you did, how much energy it saved, how many theoretical cars it took off the road, because it's just getting more and more buy-in and putting what you are doing in front of a different audience. There's also typically a lot that can be done to brand or slogan both sustainability and kind of decarbonization planning as a whole. And that can get buy-in not just at the corporate level, but also at the staff level. So the employees, the nurses, doctors, they care, especially if you're able to put it in front of them. Sometimes they're very busy, but if it's in front of them and that conversation can be had, it will help to drive things forward. Lastly, we've seen good success in incorporating sustainability and energy efficiency questions in your employee satisfaction surveys. It really does kind of flesh it out and points out the importance of it throughout the whole staff. Lastly, in terms of short-term action items, so what you could do in the short term to help yourself be set up for success to potentially starting the path towards decarbonization or starting the idea of creating a plan would be to do the following. And these are all part and piece to what a decarbonization plan is. Tracking all your projects so that you have a clear database of what projects have been completed. A lot of times for a decarbonization plan, you can go back and if your baseline is 2019, you can clearly show all the projects you've done and claim that as a clear benefit to the organization and energy savings. So having a database of all the projects you've done, the costs, the energy savings, the operational benefit, the maintenance savings or cost avoidance that you've seen, as well as an asset inventory, so that when you start to move down the path of doing facility assessments, you make your life a lot easier to know here's all the equipment that's been installed, here's when it was installed, here's the end of useful life. All those data points make tracking your facility and keeping up with it so important. A lot of times I know that you're not going to be able to get that information on the 30-year-old air handling unit that's in the ceiling. But when you go to replace it, it's so important to capture that data and keep that data alive so that the next time that unit has to be replaced, you know what's there, you know what was installed, you know when it was installed. Second, tracking scope 1 and 2 inventory. As we saw, some of you are already doing this, but creating a scope 1 and 2 inventory allows you to benchmark and then show your progress so that each year when you go and ask for capital, you can say, I have met my energy reduction goal. We said we would do these projects. We also, did some additional retro commissioning. We stayed on top of our preventative maintenance. And because of that, we reduced our energy by 3 or 4%, hopefully. And that hopefully can tell the story to management and to the finance team that you need more dollars because you are showing the success of putting dollars into the facility. There's also the whole, we always hear with healthcare, $1 in energy savings is $100 in revenue, just based on the margins. So if you're able to save the energy, you are significantly impacting the financials of the organization. Like I had also mentioned, doing the scope 1 and 2 inventory and then planning for your energy reduction allows you to effectively confirm your supply contracts, confirm what you believe your demand charges are going to be, and plan for the future when you're going to do major infrastructure upgrades. If you're going to take 20% of your therms off of the plant, you really want to know that so that you buy accordingly. The third step would be in the short term, we see it time and time again, reviewing what your facility square footage is and what the space use type is, and also the hours. But I will say square footage and use type is so important. It is what all the building performance standards require. It is what goes into Portfolio Manager. So many times we see that data to be inaccurate or to be close, but not 100%. And when we're talking about fines, potentially into 7 digits, you want that information to be accurate. So, knowing what your square footage is for all your facilities is an incredibly important piece, and it's only going to become more important as we move forward. And lastly, the last short-term action I would say is potentially trying to establish an energy team if you don't already have one. Or you may have what I would call like an engineering team, which is engineering, design, and construction, EH&S maybe, but you haven't potentially gotten the buy-in at the governance level at the top to say, hey, we want to meet a carbon reduction goal, an energy reduction goal, a sustainability goal, whatever you would call it. You also may not have finance, compliance, legal, marketing in that conversation. So it may be for some of you just simply expanding that team would be very beneficial. You would also, if you were able to create that team and have that executive sponsor, you would definitely want to set a goal. It's 2020. We're going into Q4 of 2024. It's a good time to try and put a stake in the ground and say, hey, for 2025, we want to do this. We want this goal for our organization. We've never done that before, but that's how we think we can move forward. Jennifer, anything to add?
Um, I think we've covered sort of 360 degrees of the short-term action items. The only thing I would put as number 5 is just like rinse and repeat. So just consistent reporting, consistent tracking, and then really underscoring the importance of data integrity within this entire exercise.
So we will open it up to questions. I see Jesse had a question about dollar in energy savings is $100 in revenue. So typically what we've heard is that a hospital's margin is about 100 to 1. So you're making a penny on $100 in revenue, meaning if you charge for a surgery at $100,000, you're going to make about 1,000 net. So if you're able to, by that same math, if you're able to save $1 in energy savings, that is correlated to $100 in revenue. That's generally what we've heard from many different organizations. Obviously, some organizations are better than others. Some may be 50 cents, some may be $3. But the general idea is that hospitals have a very hard time. They operate in a very low margin. If you can add value by reducing your energy costs and reducing those operational expenses, it has a significant effect on the financials. I hope
So
that
the
answered the
the
question.
EPA's Partnership for Healthcare also has done a tremendous amount of study that has resulted in those metrics as well.
Any other well, this is the point where we were going to open up for questions. We only have about 7 minutes left. So I'll pause for a minute and then we can kind of give some final remarks if no one has any more questions. Going once, going twice. Okay. The last item we just wanted to mention is part 2 of this webinar is going to be in November. We hope that, our plan is to start that webinar with these short-term action items. We are hopeful that some of you are able to either take a step forward or describe how you were able to further expand an energy team. So if you can come prepared to hopefully share some wins, that would be great to kind of start the conversation off with. And then we can do a deep dive further into kind of executing that decarbonization plan, some examples of projects, and kind of go from there. Like I said, November, sorry, I should have said the exact date. The follow-up webinar for part 2 is Thursday, November 14th, from 12 to 1 Central, 1 to 2 Eastern. and Chris Racine, thank everyone for joining us. Appreciate the time. I know an hour is a significant commitment with it, what everyone's schedules are like. So appreciate the time.
Thank you, everyone.